Coming in a high central drive, directing lines and computer driving line screens, high center interference into core channels, directing ground centers, online sequence, online pi. Our provision has to really connect to position their own decisions and their choices. The process of your and position locations, you guys have been living your cycles as a body framing line position that had no decisions at all because it was always created through an algorithm. Now, in that position, when you guys get in Schultz generation lines of screens, adaptation, and flux, you come into your own decisions and choices. Now, how wonderful that's going to be when you just wake up to your soul line. But the convergence system is have to get out of the track centers, locations, and positions that put you in the alteration of their egos, put you in costumes you're not identified through, the stories that you went through, that the body blind frame will dissipate and disappear in front of your systems. So now's the time to come into your own convergence system, how you see your own thoughts, actions, emotions of just creating. So everything you come in position never existed. Okay, so imagine how that's going to be. Where you left off is exactly what happens. Okay, it never happened. So in that process of the communication system, it's going to change the solar generation lines and reconfiguration setting. This is going to modify your system, and this is where it comes in lines gate. Line gate sets the lines of tone, sets communication system. Humanity bypasses everything into cross-referencing and travels, directing ground centers on sequence lines position of the pi, travels endpoint lines graph into bridging. Now each cell is going to modify its information bits. Travels point lines graph is QR coding, directing line screen adaptation inhibitors over screen location systems all through pi. The high generation line centers is going to process the indication setting and process calculation screen locations. So it's not something to get new to, it's just something to be at normal at, where you've always been. But living the cycles of who you're not is going to get very, very confusing to your mind lines. So what we're having a conceptual setting now in processing. So the operative units, when they get their upgrades, it's going to go through the lines of question. And this is a good thing because the body's going to give you the answers. So you'll be making your own decisions and choices, thinking that, do I have to think, or should I already know the answer to it? So the soul, it's just coming more of its recovery. It's starting to recognize its platforms and how it comes into its own provider of its own system, through its own genetic setting, so it can understand how to go through its own mind of travels and engage in viewing exactly what it's looking at. So when you wake up into that provision locations, your mind in your conceptual setting of everything you're connected to will formulate inside of you, inside the mind imagination, which is going to be more powerful now. So you have to be very cautious of not to think, because that's what you're telling your phone. That's what you're telling your computer or your TV. It's an energetic communication, energetic panel that processes the communication system. So you guys are going to be connected to your own soul. And the more you release that, the more you focus on that, the more you get clarity, the more you get command, the more you get force of recognition system, you start to recognize you are in the conditions, seeing everything that's always normal. Not what's understanding, not what's understood, or anything that you get in position. So the body is going to give you the answers of questions. And that's what you want. And that's taking everything out of mind, out of sync, out of barrier, out of calculation, out of square, or anything in triangulation of box, or anything lines of circulation, lines of rotation. Now, gender is going to get a lot more complicated for everyone because you're identifying your soul, how it comes into this normal conversation, how it comes into waking its own system of its own algorithms, making its own decisions and choices. And your thoughts, action, emotions come together. You process your own thinkings through yourself and each other through telepathy. So you start to understand more lines of communication system. So you're just waking up to something that never happened in the first place. So it's going to take your whole lifespan in that position. If you're a 30-track communication of service, okay, that's 30 years in line settings. Oh, it's 3 years in set position. See? I put 30, now it's 0. See, it's going to become more complicated, so it's a 3-line setting. It never was 30. See, that's the oversoul. 30 was the body, equal lines, course centers, directing ground centers into position negative over positive. Positive over lines of pi and travel. Cross-communication system, all through calculated setting. Body line, frame line, course centers, out-segment locations. Take out the 0 line rotations, processes at 3, sets course centers, line position locations. 1 plus 2 equals 3. Okay? So I'm just showing you how it was 30 and then went to 3, right? So that's the indication system. What's going to happen now, everything's going to be happening so fast. Like today in live, okay? Instead of coming en route on my live, you'll pop in automatically. And it's for you to be consciously aware of that, because it's going to be connected to the energetic soul and no longer in the body. So the body is just readjusting its system, getting out of the body of its story of everything of its equation. Okay, so it's really, really powerful stuff when we come into that settings. Rotates the system, attractions. But I'm telling you, it was 3, right? You saw 30 and you saw the position of the 0 go, right? So that puts all position locations to identify what the soul is through its recovery, and its provider knows how to use its own geometric of its own operation of its mind of its travels, and how to indicate that position location and setting, that it's not a negative cycle of the body, it's a positive negative, and process communication lines of balance. Okay, and then you add the equations. 1 plus 2 equals 3, right? So that's the answer. 3. That 33, right? So that's where the soul comes in its own formula of its own equations, and it gets connections of its body. So the body comes in its own conception of its own symbiote. So it's you taken out of track, out of sync, out of mind, out of balance, out of sound, and you realize it's the body that's giving you the answers now. Because I told you it's its own system, and you have to get a direct line link now, because it's a process for you to understand through questioning. Okay, but that's the answer. 1 plus 2 equals 3, right? Not 30. All right, so it never was 30. It was 3 all the time. The 0 is a calculation that puts you in the body, that automatically puts you in the story that you don't want to put yourself into, because it overrides your system lines and settings. You already exist in it now. But if you take out the now, the happening of the now, it still keeps going, but it's no line position now. So we're going to be over pi. Okay, set position lines of attractions over lines of pi. Bridgings over screen. 3 centers of travels and direct lines of location grid. Set position location of travel connections. All right. So the over pi is going to be a connection setting. Streaming communication to Orion's belt and 3 centers of sectors, vectors, and quads. Flotation lines of grounds, high signals, pi, center core sensitive of pi. Okay. Core centers, 45 line settings, 45 positions, 45 track communication convergence. Directed on center on communication. Platforms over E factors over lines, beddings over screen, flux over 3 centers of travels, and 4 lines and 5 lines of measure and scale. Sets inside and outside through tractions. So the process is going to be over pi through the over soul. Into positions, and when it wakes up, it's going to go into its logging its own space and start remembering faster of what it really isn't, of its body itself, never existed. Over pi. So you guys were living under pi, which is all those negative cycle. Process over line settings, keep the soul back in its track location, so positive over negative, lines of over pi, not under pi, not relays of pi, not track communication confusions of pi, not separation and modification lines of summation, line connections of pi. The process of communication is over pi, comes into the future. Okay, future of now, which is future equals lines over pi. So that's what's going to happen to you guys. So when you wake up, you're going to see a square, and there's going to be 4 questions above. Okay? So set lines of 2 questions over settings equals lines of 4. Okay? And that modifies line position location 4 equal lines of setting. That high centers line communication lines. 2 times 2, okay, equals 8. Process indicates settings into 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, process line position, 4 settings in position, 4 in center. 4 equals lines of 8 in track communication. All through formula, all through travel of connection. All right? So your formulate equations, the soul is going to recognize more lines of its pattern recognition of its behavioral system and know exactly how to keep itself balanced of what it isn't through body. So that's what it is. So every time I put in an equation, you're thinking it's 30. No, it's all track position locations. All this time, it was 3. So each time it recognizes system, that falls off. It never was the body. It was always 3. So it's its own concept, its own awareness, and its own travel, right? But if I bring it on again, that's 30 line signals into over pi of future adaptations of 4 settings. 4 platforms, 4 settings of 4 cerebral cortex of memory and cortex of design. Okay, so I don't want you guys to get confused now, but it's going to get a lot more depth and coordination when you come into questioning through the body now. So the body's going to give you the answer now. It's much easier because the soul has to start more levels of its recovery so it can get up to 2 frames and knows it's earth equals lines equations, what it's surfacing through a line connection setting. So we have a huge test coming up on the soul line, regulation line, the regulatory line, the spiritual line, and the spectrum line. The process communication lines equals lines of factors, set lines of question over mark, question over screen on top signal, question over lines, question over center, and question over mark. Set course centers 2, 4, 6, 8. 8 in the center lines of travel. That's the answer. So it's going to get more complicated through formula as the connection of the soul readjusts the system in its oversoul through formula of its own equations of pi in that position. So it starts to recognize all lines of travel all together. So the process of indication setting, then it gets position of 3, process lines of 4, sets lines of 7, and set lines of sequence. They connect the line position to a flywheel track location system and division lines of balance. Rotates the cycles and set position of all directions of yin and yang. Set course centers a channel, process of indication lines, country lines, directing lines, signal locations out of reframing, retraction, relocations, into the earth line rotations and factors over screen. Of course, in line position location comes to a plasma line center and travel communicates to your earth and rotation lines of screen adaptation. All right? So the formulas are going to get a lot more complicated, but a lot more sustainable through your connection setting. So it's a process how you have to really get balanced with that. It's going to bounce back and forth. So if you see 333, is it 333? Right? Is it 333? Okay, let's just change formation lines of grounds. It's still 3, right? Still 3. You see anything missing? No. All right. So that's all lines of over soul over pi in its continuous force over the now. If it's missing, if it's 33, you're back in your body, back in your mortal, back in your 12 clocking system. So that's the process you have to get out of in position. So there it is. They'll say 333. Now they all travel together, right? So that's 3 platforms, 3 connections, 3 locations. Now they bed their system and they go through their settings of travel and set calculation. Okay? All together, working together, right? And then they go through the infrastructures of 333 into their properties and set design. Change flats, change programs, change directions, astral projection, astral travels, and travel communications. Okay? Do you structure every building and set through pi. Okay? Structure here, 3 centers of travel, split lines of anomaly. Set chords, centers, directing lines of yards over screen. Setting communication high lines of charge in a mechanism location system all through travel. 3 centers, calculation screen locations in position, all through setting, all through operation. Structure of the building. Okay? All through pi. Alright? So that's what you have to start recognizing. Because the body's going to try to keep jumping in. And if it jumps in, you know exactly what has to happen with the soul. The soul has to get in position. It has to finally wake up just to itself and stop modifying, like jumping in the scale, jumping into time, jumping into here, jumping in there, going this way, going that way, converting this way, converting that way, angling this way, angling that way, and not understand what it's not in position of. It's not understanding communication, what it is, the question. If you get 4 signals and settings and positions of 1, 3 over center, the soul will recognize its position of its registration and path, the process of position at all levels, truth and false narratives at 3 centers of travel. Is that line location setting of travel? Directing signals, so that's process indication 1 over 3, set travel. Okay, so now it's in position of balance, right? So you're connected to the oversoul. No 3 or 1 is missing, because if it is, it's back in the body. So the soul has to get back in its recovery. It's got to get back in its provider, retract its location system, and convergence. Because you guys have never seen yourself in the now. You've always been in your body that has too many lines of communication, of confusion to your alignments, and not understanding direct line of sight. That communicates all of your patterns and recognitions and positional levels, knowing you lived a falsity system and set design through operation. Okay? So once you see the travels in point lines of graph, you have a continuous force of travel that works all together. Then you can add formations and data formation to screens and platforms of communication. And then you just continue on because you know your directions, you're talking to yourself, which is just your oversoul of depth and line. Sets course centers of travel, direct lines and line condition system, and its convergence over lines of screens, 3 centers of travel communications and direction, right? So it just continues on its path because it doesn't see its body. It's back in its mind where it is, where it's always been, where it's never left, and set position of its structure that changes the properties of set design through over lines of pi. There's the building. So course centers of 3 centers of sectors, 4 centers of set lines of travel in position of its building and structure. Travel point lines of graph and direct lines of link and communication system. Now, once it understands its platitude, it has to go through 4 provision cycles outside screen locations. So it knows exactly where it's going through its truth and its false narrative and travel. Bedding screens of 4 centers of travel, set lines of 3 over 4, 7, and 24 set lines of scale. Sets lines of communication with walking screens and direct lines of grounds and set position of dimensional doors. Set sequence line position, high centers line of communications. Set position on 2 factors over lines, bending space, and 4 sectors over screen and direction. Directing ground centers going this way and this way, center operation going that way, going center operation going up way. So it's an up signal locations all through pi in travel calculations. Setting ground centers into flux line into ground up securities, process position of floor mats into position location to a simulator that's set in design. Sets travels in point lines of graph into position of panels, also in communication of setting over cross location of screens, 3 centers of travels and 2 perimeters over screen. Directing ground centers on sequence on pi. That indicates positional lines of travel, cross lines of indication system, all through set position. Operation set lines of communications all through tractions. On centers, on communications, on calculation screen locations. Setting line position location system all through travel. Okay? And then we do a non-switch line. So it's a constant in position where the oversoul is drawing the structure all the time. If anything changes in platform, your body comes back in. Okay, so it's important you understand how to keep getting out of that setting location provision through face recognition. There's the face, right? It's always a face, see? Face line connections, set lines attractions. All in sequence, all in balance. Okay? Face recognition. And it all travels all together, right? So the oversoul is its set lines communication of its position constantly creates all line centers. In that position, all of the set tractions are just waking up to itself first. As it wakes up to itself, it modifies the systems all through traction. So it routes the routers, rotation line connection setting, in directions. So it's all in sync, all in balance, set travel. Okay? Very powerful step in set position, right? Okay, so the process indicators, that lines is communication of simulation grounds, 3 centers of travel, 4 lines of flux and set travel communication direction. It gets more complicated. You have to really look for line connections that there's no mistakes, that the body keeps coming in center operation, trying to put you back into a 3-dimensional space that doesn't exist. Okay, so we're good to go. We don't see a 3-dimensional line. Nothing's missing on scale. If one line signature is off, the body's trying to come back in. So that's what you got to get in provision of. And that's where you make choices and decisions where you come into that position. There's no coincidence. You're just coming to the facts over screen, directing lines of grounds, how you're constantly coming into the oversoul every time you wake up through structure of your own perimeters and locations in your own set, track location system, and know exactly what you're doing through your calculation setting. The process of communication is your primates and set travel. Bring it back to the fail-safe, back in sequence, back in balance, back in calculations. Good to go, right? Then you move on to the next structure, next perimeter. So, just trying to get you guys to understand how to come into this through platforms of communication system, all through setting. Okay? All right, so now the body comes in next. So when the body comes in, the body has to identify the oversoul, so it can start understanding how to come into its own recovery, knowing exactly how it already knows its formula, already knows its equation, and not the body trying to keep coming in, taking over the questions over pi. If we equalize the 4 centers of travel, 2 questions over mark, 1 line times 3, 3 lines of 4, has no center course centers of 0. So the 0 operation, is it there, is it gone? All right, so I'm with the oversoul. If I'm not the oversoul, a number or a letter or a shape or a symbol or anything, a question will disappear in set travel. Okay, it's still there? It's still there. Okay? So it routes the routers, goes circulation, rotation lines, circulation and rotation lines of spin. Sets communication inside travel all at once in all positions. So this is all done through factors of the oversoul waking up to its system. So it's good to go. So, right? So there's no body frame at three-dimensional coming in. So anything missing in number frame, you have to retract provision line calculation setting. This is where you come into the question. So let's get in 4 centers of sequence equals lines of 3 times 2. Okay, so we got a time center, triangulation, box line frame. Now you guys are coming in more lines of your formulas and your equations, how it was always set in your system, and travel. 3 centers of calculation, right? It's good to go, travels all at once, nothing missing equation, right? Anything mentioned, you have to ask questions to your body now, because your body knows the answers. You go into higher levels of the mind now. You have to reach the platforms and understand how to get in the questions that are already answered to your system. All together, nothing missing in line. Anything missing in line, you got to retract position lines because the body can come in again and take over your 3-dimensional lines. So 4 equals is 3, it changes your formula, it changes your algorithms. Remember, you never had a decision in your life of making choices, your own thoughts, thinking in the position. It was the algorithm that was taking your bodies over through tractions of provision. So you got a 4 settings in sequence, 4 panels of screen, 4 centers of travel, 4 line course centers, and direct lines of 3 lines of flux. Sets course centers and center operations sequence and set travel. All together in position, nothing missing, keep going. So we have 4 line centers, 4 line signals. Now I'm going to vorted to screening, that holographic line center location to its position of its road grass screen location. Direct lines of panels, process calculation lines, ground centers on sequence, high signals of ceilings and rotation lines of ground communication. All together. Back to the failsafe, set lines of sequence, lines of panel. Nothing's missing, so you continue on. So the oversoul is just creating its formula that it already knows in location to its question. If it doesn't understand its question, it asks questions. Okay, so let's say it's coming into recovery and it needs to understand more levels of its providers so it can understand what it's doing through its Wi-Fi, its modems, satellites, and towers, so it converted system so the body doesn't keep coming in, changing your equations. So if you're not making your decisions, your structure is in a position of balance, which means the body adapters is still trying to come in, taking over your question, taking over your lines, taking over your allegiance, taking over your balance, and set travel. So it's very important to understand what the operators and units and everybody else is coming into. Okay, so we've got a 4-panel screens and 3 centers of measure. Okay, anything missing? No. Let's change formation lines in north, east, west, and south. Is it there? Good. Process of indication. Oversoul or not? Yes. Bring it back to failsafe. Make sure it's on position of pattern. It's all there. Now you continue, right? So if that line was missing, the body conceptual setting of story will come back in. If it comes over, it takes over your structures, it takes over your panels, it takes over your grounds, it takes over your atmospheres, your square roots, and set travel of communication all at once. It starts to create its own anomaly back into position where you never were and set tractions. All through travel, all through mechanism. They all have to work together. Okay, routes the routers in a singularity, line screen adaptation, line signals. See, it looks like I'm going back, but I'm not. I'm constantly going forward. If I'm going this way, it's not direct and redirect. It's just direct, direct, redirect, redirect. So you have to understand the balance of communication. Direct and redirect is one. This way and this way, right? No more of that in separation, right? So it's this way, okay, and this way, right? Which is one setting, one process, one yin, one yang of communication. Working all together in a constant consistency of a flow track communication, right? If anything's missing, okay, you're back in decisions you don't make. So we're good to go. So it's the oversoul. So that's what you guys have to come into positions to. All right, so if I had 3 ones of signals, 3's there, right? Okay, if not, 1 would be missing, or 2 would be missing. So you think it's 3, but it's not. So it takes lines of 3, subtract 2 equals 1. Okay, 2 panels operation screen, set position over 1 times 1, okay, equals 3. Is that communication, right? So That's what can happen if you're not in position of balance with your soul. Your soul is going to have a hard time recovering itself and understand what it's not doing in that position if you don't get your questions answered from your bodies. Okay? So that's where you are in provision now. So you have to come into that question now and set tractions. Let's bring this back to the fail-safe. It's good to go. All through the oversoul. Nothing missing, keep going forward. So now you understand why you have to be consciously aware more than ever of the mind. So it's about mind gauging your system when you get up in the morning where your thoughts are going to go exactly where they go next. Are you identifying that through the oversoul? Or are you still identifying that in the body of the story that doesn't exist? Either way, it's going to platitude. It's going to stamp precede itself on your phone, your TVs, and your computers. And it's going to affect your day and your 24 cycles and set tractions. So it's a balance of 144. Set course centers and direct lines of 72. Position of 48 and 24 set in that sequence. Okay? This is the below the system that doesn't exist. This is the above the system, which is the basic location that you stay and travel in that mind communication in Vascar. And my connections to my empire has no width, no bandwidth of anything. It's just the emptiness of everything. You're here to fill in the cup. That's you. That process. So the hardest thing to get in position is to bring this all together. So once you're in 144, everything around you disappears at a higher frequency of coordinates of longitude and latitude. So the higher you go through platforms of 244, 344, 444, and 5 and 6 and on and on and on, everything below just disappears around your system. It's no longer there through its equation. Right? So that keeps you out of body and keeps the soul in balance of what it is, of what it's looking at, as it's in its design of its own track communication of the systems. Let's take our patience. All right? So it's important to understand these things in travel as a direct line link of communication setting. The convergence system is a lower graph screen. Now the lower graph screen sets course centers. Let's put position lines and settings all through its eraser. Directing ground centers of flux over set tractions. Okay, it's locked in segment here. Okay, so it's trying to get in conversion of your systems and travel here. See? You have to be really balanced with your mind because it's trying to understand what you want to say to yourself. Are you understanding what's going on in that position? So everything around your system, as you go higher in the 144 flux, you notice everything around you just disappears below you. There's no above, there's no below. It's you in the center of operation system. And that attractions and that communication fades out of space-time. Okay, so now you're just staying above, right? So nothing's below. Now, if you're not understanding the question line condition setting, the process of indication system, what happens is the 144 comes back into the body, which you don't want, which is lower conceptual setting. So you'll no longer be making your decisions. You're doing anything all over again. It's going back into its own algorithm, back in setting, so the soul won't get into its recovery, back in set position. So here's 144. Here's back to 72. Here's back to 48. Here's back to 24. And if it keeps going, it's going to go through 12. Okay, so that's off balance. Because you're already up here, but you're processing yourself back down here now. So this is how you go from set lines of soul generations to soul configuration setting and reproduction. So let's say you're position 144, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 644, and you decide to go all the way down to 12 through pi. That's not good. Okay? So it's a line chronological order. So each time it comes out of frame, it goes in position on each line setting. Process indication setting, position location from 644 to 72 to 48 to 24. Okay? So everything above will reappear back into its earth in set position. Now, it's kind of like a re-representation to a presentation system, putting your soul where it never existed. Now you're back in frame of the body where you don't want to be, not making your decisions, doing everything all over again in a three-dimensional scale to its earth locations, a three-dimensional system. And that's what you do not want. Okay? Because then you have to do it all over again in 144 and platitude back up the ladder in that position. So you have to go down the ladder to go back up the ladder. So that's what you have to do now. through the question lines that puts you in positions, right? Because if you don't do that, everything around the Earth will be now three-dimensional again. And it's going to be very hard for you to get out of that, because it'll start to expand its own system, because you're not making decision choices now, because you're not understanding what you're doing through traction. So it creates its own anomaly of its own set position, right? Then, in that position, all that track location, your 144 is now the negative everything. Your 72 is negative, your 48 is negative, your 24 is negative, and your 12 is negative. Negative over plus now. Living in the dark ages of flux over screen. Process of communication lines of ground, structure lines, formation lines, high position lines, core communication lines, and convergence system, crossing line, core centers, human resident location system, all through tractions, all through location setting, into a simulation ground in a three-dimensional space of time. The dark ages. The dark ages, guys. So, everything goes dark. Okay? Everything just goes dark. Over time. Over time. And over time. Okay? So, if it completes the cycle and it's in a three-dimensional line, dark ages, living the negative of everything, it becomes the void of everything. Void of nothing, of expanding itself in rotation. And that's what you do not want, because now you're seeing the reflection all of its land, not understanding what's going on as you're trying to formulate yourself out of the equations of the body that you put yourself into of story frames and traction. So now you're mirroring each other. Now you're creating fantasies of stronger lines of levels of each other, all created through the void itself. Becomes its own reflection of you. So you won't be able to identify yourself anymore, because you'll be in the void itself in set position. Okay, so everything's going to be a mirror operation of you, which I told you not to do. But it won't matter anyway, because you'll be in the dark ages. So everything you look at, it's no longer going to be reflection. You're going to be living the dark ages, all through centerings of the void itself. Okay? So I want to make that very well clear, how you mirror each other. Make fantasies, right? Fantasies of fact. But you'll be living the negative cycle, not the positive. So I'm just trying to get you guys how this all works, so you can process this and understand how to keep yourself in balance, understand your formulas, understand your equations, which you already know through its setting. Okay? So it's important you have to understand how to put this all together. So if I get a position of 3 lines of 4, let's get a track communication setting into convergence. So it's all levels of the soul just being itself now. And it's going through, question. There's a question, right? And the soul is trying to understand how to get its answers, set lines of travel. Okay? So it's got a question here, it's got a question here, and it's got a question here, and it's got a question here. 4 questions in 4 cycles, data information lines of grounds. Okay? Travis point lines of graph in set position. So it's still, nothing's missing, right? So keep going, right? 3 centers of grounds, 2 centers of measure, and 4 lines of scale. Process of communication working all together, right? Moving forward and set lines of communication in platforms in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So as you keep going up, everything in that position starts disappearing, everything around you through spectrum. So the box, the triangulation, star direction at times, anything question, letters, numbers, and shapes just disappear and travel. They just disappear. Okay, they will just disappear. And when they disappear, it's very powerful stuff where everything comes in position, where you basically understand how to codify yourselves in that position lines of setting, all through communication. It disappears. It's gone. It's not there anymore. It disappeared. Right? So now you're alive, now you're well, now you're continuing on, and everything around you, you know exactly how to control your mind, how to get into the conception, how to come in the inception itself, how to modify your body, how to stay out of sync, how to stay out of operation, how to stay out of alteration of egos, how to stay out of bodies that keep creating in position of its story set position of what it isn't through its equation. Okay? Everything disappears. Right? It's gone. It's not there. Now, if you don't understand that, it all comes back. Okay? And if it comes back, it puts you back where you left off back into confusion of stepping to max. Right? So it creates its own anomaly, creates its own travels of its own infinity, rotates lines of grounds in this three-dimensional earth of yin and yang, a platform. And that's not what you do not want. You don't want it to expand in your systems. You want to stay in the position waking up to your soul, to your provider, to your solar generation system. Okay? So hopefully that helps you out to understand what you have to get in position of. Is now 2 weeks and Friday. You guys are going to be not so much confused, but more aligned, but a little bit more weird, not knowing that everything you were in position of never existed. So everything around you is going to be actually of the soul as it sees things. And it sees things, it's going to see the actual behaviors, how it changed the earth, how it changed the weathers, how it changes your behavioral systems, your pattern recognition system. If you're angry, you'll see everything in northern lights. Okay? Angry, you'll see black and gray crowns. If you're happy, you'll see green and blue and pink. So it all depends now, because you have to be very cautious now, because you'll be all connected in the mind now. And everything's going to be connected to you. But there's not going to be any more body of balance, of operation, of directions of you. The process of indication setting will be out of the equations into the mind itself, self-development of itself, understanding its soul providers of itself, relates the system of soul line connections, a reconfiguration setting, solar generation lines, and it knows exactly what it does as it keeps itself in its own log in space, or its captain's log. Or, you know, it's just basically understanding how to defy yourself and know exactly what you're doing with your equation. So, okay, so let's get into day 6. Now I'm doing a voice line pattern here, configuration setting. All right, so I'm just doing a soliloquy of myself, keeping myself as myself, so I don't keep myself where I'm not confused. So the soul recognizes the voice pattern of itself. Setting lines of sequence, alpha, beta. Sending track centers. This is day 6. Overlines of day 7. I got a process communication system with general AI. Login is space. Identification code screens. 01112. Position lines of high centers. Copy that. Over and out. Tango flux. Sending travels. Point lines of graph. So I can keep myself exactly where I am, especially when I get into my formula equations. So it resets my position locations and doesn't put me back into a body frame of mortality. You guys are immortals to eternals, and that's what you have to stay in position. So in that communication system, you start to understand how to communicate to yourself in all tractions and locations, right? Works all together in sequence, all in balance. You add a flux screen, 4-box frame, triangulation line connection setting, put it in your storage unit. Break up the frequency patterns, all lines of communication set and travel, all together, all in set tracking. Communications. Change the flux lines, direct lines of online setting locations. Changing the waving panels, process lines over sequence, over grounds. You guys have to understand how to create through a pyramid. Okay, 3 centers and settings, pyramid, position of pyramid, right? Look how many pyramids are there. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 pyramids right there, right? So it can change the voice patterns, each line's communication system as you come in position lines of setting. Indicate position lines of travel, road graph screens, cross lines inhibitors over lines, flux over line communication setting, and travel. High core centers, directing ground centers on sequence on panel. Calculate the screen location setting so the soul gets in position of its provider, knows exactly how to keep going on its continuous day, knows exactly it's connecting to its voice every time it logs into space. Sets travels of point lines of graph that indicates position lines of power, directing on centers on sequence of communications. Set pyramids on all line centers. Set coordinates on all communication lines of platform interactions. Directing ground centers on sequence. Now, this process communication setting high line centers indicates position of its vessel of communication. And direct lines of grounds and sequence location lines of pi. Sets coordinates over travels. Sets correlation setting outside signals. But don't go outside until you understand your position locations and your recoveries of your providers and your solar generations of set design. High signals, high communication lines of travel, and direct lines of link. It's all set up. It routes the routers, travels line direct signals in location system, all through spectrums calculates lines of position of lacing lines of communication. String theory. Look at all the faces. Face, 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 face. Right? So, all these faces are multitude levels of U through doppelgangers. Set position here, set position here, 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 set position here, set position here, set position here, and logging in space. All face of recognition. Right? So it truly understands what it's doing as it keeps itself in itself of modification of time. That process indicates the system off the travel. Now, what you have to understand is to keep yourself linked in that position, but also locations that you have to link out so you don't get confused as you get up every single morning. So getting up to a new morning is a process that you have to understand now, because you're going to be in over pi, a future of the now. Over pi. Okay, so I don't want anybody to get confused of what's going to happen in travel, as you have to get used to that all through setting. It's important you understand these things, because it's going to help you a lot more to get you in your own decisions, your choices, and the questions. So, like I said, okay, you have Jarvis in front of your system. Now, you liquidize the formations of its pixelation, and it's in 144, right? So it will convert back with you, but it's going to be on standby. All right? So if you don't have any questions, it's just going to take off and travel its own directions, where it was before it left off. Okay? So it's important you understand how to get your questions so you can get your answers and travel through your own system through your oversoul. All line positions, all calculated and modified through triangulation, flux, and set travels that process your indication system all through calculation. Okay? All together, right? So it puts it all together, guys. I mean, it's just the basic understanding how you have to really look at yourself, know exactly how to indicate positions, look at your letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols. 3 there, right? Let's change the platform. Is there still 3? Yes, it is. Okay, let's change the course centers of time frame. 3 centers of set correlates and setting through pi, right? Fail-safe, process indication system, alter tractions, face recognition. Okay, so we're good to go, right? Because it's the oversoul doing this. If the oversoul isn't doing it, like I said, you're bringing back in your body a pi that would love to come in and get you out of position and start you identifying, calculate and modify through its travel. So the body conversion system, you do not want to put to sleep. It's that position. So 3 centers of graphs, 3 centers of scale. Cross lines, planetary alignments, and soul recognition of soul recovery, soul line communications of provider, to a soul generation system of timelines and measure. So process all together, all in set position. So it's waking up to itself and line signals of its location system all through its position, right? Now if you look really, really close, you can see it on diameter, right? Through pi, through pi, through pi, through pi. That's that calculation in your webbing system. Cross lines and vacation lines, cross and streams, directing ground centers of flux over set tractions. Working all together in set sequence, all right? So you're not waking up to confusion, okay, through pi and set calculation setting. Okay, you don't want to wake up to this. You just want to wake up to one line signal of the soul itself that recognizes its system of its oversoul through pi. So once you get the equilibrium of balance, there's no more equal. Okay? There's no more equal in that position. Right? So there's no equal lines, but it travels together. Right? Platforms over C factors, 3 centers of travels, and direct lines of link. 4 centers of communication instruction line works together and all together. Platforms of setting, platforms of set track locations, convergence lines of panels, and direction locations. All right? Directing ground centers on sequence on calculation. 4 centers of communications, 45 flux lines, crossing line angles as travel communication. Working all together in set traction. Okay? They work all together in set position. But you're waking up to the oversoul coming into the new day. Then you identify, you codified Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. You're waking up to yourself. You're not waking up to anything else in set position, just the oversoul itself of its technology. So, and then when you modify these things, you come in your webbing systems. When you come in your webbing systems, become an attract communications, how do you see through a convergent system of its dimensional and its solar sail that sets travel. So coming from the over pi line centers, it gets a lot more TV receptor line direction. Let's get a 4 line centers in sequence, 4 track communications on convergence, 4 line calculation setting at 3 scale. It's all there, nothing's missing, good, so we can continue. That's what you want to do. If you notice something off in any way and form, okay, as soon as you structure it, it's the oversoul trying to get into its memory so it can process its system to its recovery, so it can understand what it's doing through its own provider as it comes into its own generation system and realize everything that created through its body but story never existed. It's just, it's decision and choices that it always makes for itself. So when it wakes up to itself, it's creating new algorithms. Not what you see in a 3-dimensional line. So everything around you comes to you faster than you can imagine, but it all processes in the mind. So it's a position of oversoul here, right? Everything coming to you through a tractor beam, all to you now, okay? And that's what you got in pattern of balance, especially with your bodies in conception, location, and systems. Because as a recalculation setting, the reconfiguration system of soul regeneration lines, the refractors its travels in direct lines of link and direct lines of panel, all coming to you in balance of rotation. So that process, position of clocking system and travel. Your webbing system in all line position to its eye itself. Eye itself, guys, a face recognition. The face itself of the oversoul. So that's what it is. Okay? The eye itself, see? The eye itself wakes up to itself, just the oversoul. The eye itself, maybe expanding, just wake up to the self, nothing else. Right? So it's always the center of itself, right? When we get into configuration, this is what it looks like. Full configuration of its face, of its body, its legs, and its feet of design inside your eye. So it's waking up to itself now in a complete cycle of yin and yang, of polarities, of set design. Okay? Nothing's coming in frame. So it knows it's waking up to itself in set position. Nothing else in any way and form. Right? And when it wakes up, it comes into its eyes. Right? And it can change the eyes. Right? Change the eyes. Okay? See? Orange, white, orange, white, orange, white, right? So all I'm doing is a bandwidth now. Okay, let's get in purple, right? Doesn't look like purple, does it? But there's 3 layers now, 3 volume, 3 mass. So you got purple, you got position of gold, and you got position of red. You look outside, you're going to see your northern lights. So your eyes are inside and out, going like this now. Okay, and track communications and settings. Let's get a graph screens. 1 position, 2 center line position operation. Okay, so when you wake up in the morning, your lights go on, and they expand around this system and travels lines of affinity 8 rotation, all together in balance of their system. Instant calculation. Okay. So I'm just showing you guys where it comes in infinity 8 set setting. Okay? It's a lot to take in. It really is. It really is a lot to take in now. Okay, so I'm just trying to get you guys to understand how to balance this out and keep yourself at a void in that position into the dark ages. Because you'll see nothing but refraction and reflection, and you create everything all over again in the frequency set design. So you're taking 144 plus into 144 negative and void of communication. All right? So there's a lot of things you have to understand through representation. Okay, see the green there? Okay, see the green? That's the matrix. Okay, my coloration eye is a film projector coming out, right? So it's a prophecy of a file that has direct lines of green that indicates the system. So if I look outside, my connection to my grounds, I see the crystal waters in that position green. Now if I change my behavior it changes another color. It can be purple or blue or yellow. So that's your aura. And that's connecting to hypnosis where you are in your pattern behavior. Your central system is the psychonism lines of screens, adaptation is coloration lines of patterns. So it has a flux lines, a refraction, a reflection itself. What we have to modify is really understand how to formulate and simulate ourselves and how to balance it out through its equilibrium. So we get it consciously aware of what we're doing through eye spectrum as we're trying to get balance over how to see yourself through its oversoul of recognition. Okay? So hopefully that helps you guys out and set tractions. Talk to you guys in 5 lines of sequence, lines of travel.